issuing executive orders on immigration to suggesting an end to birthright citizenship. President Trump has been pushing a multitude of controversial issues. The question, though, is whether the current president is acting against the U.S. Constitution. Hello, I'm Alican Ayanlar from New York. The Square starts now. When President Trump was sworn in nearly 2 years ago, he took an oath to protect, preserve, and defend the Constitution of the United States. But it seems that since he took office, the word unconstitutional is something we are hearing more and more. Donald Trump himself admits he can be controversial, but is he overstepping legal boundaries when it comes to the country's founding document? Over the course of this show, we'll move the issue away from the political stage of Washington and get the views of people here in New York and across the nation. But first, our correspondent Courtney Keeley takes a look at what has stirred up so much controversy.
This is Philadelphia, the largest city in the state of Pennsylvania and home to a diverse population. The Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution were both debated and signed here in the Assembly Room in Independence Hall. This is the birthplace of America. The story goes, upon exiting the Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin, one of the well-known framers of the Constitution, was asked, "Well, doctor, what do we have, a monarchy or a republic?" Franklin replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." More than 200 years on, and people here still want to talk about the U.S. Constitution.
Well, I think there's a lot of shades of gray, and we need to just sort of sit back and observe, see what transpires, like sort of like an evolution instead of doing anything radical right away, instead of a revolution, maybe more of an evolution of things, and sort of sit back and see what course it takes.
Tough immigration policies, ending birthright citizenship, and freedom of speech are just some of the key issues that are throwing President Trump into the middle of a legal minefield.
What's going around is this notion that whatever the president does in the immigration and national security area is always fine. That is untrue. That's sort of one of those myths that's been propagated. He has to comply with the Constitution.
That's enough. I was going to ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
When the president and CNN's correspondent Jim Acosta clashed in a White House briefing, Acosta's press pass was revoked. But a federal judge citing the First Amendment and the Fifth Amendment ruled against Trump, saying the White House did not have the power to revoke the press pass.
Journalists need to know that in this country, their First Amendment rights, freedom of the press, are sacred. They're protected in our Constitution.
When the U.S. Constitution was signed here, it set up three branches of the national government: the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive, a series of checks and balances. It also kept a separation of power between the national government and the states.
They work for us, and we have the right to make them accountable to us. That's why journalism and the First Amendment is so important, because it is journalism and the First Amendment as its shield that's going to hold the government accountable.
The Constitution is difficult to change. It defines how the government, and indeed what the president himself, can and cannot do. With just under 2 years until the presidential elections, Trump will want to be as effective as possible in passing his policies. The question, though, is whether the president can always call the shots, or does he face his biggest battle yet with the supreme law of the nation he governs? Courtney Keeley, The Square, Philadelphia.
Courtney Keeley reporting there from Independence Hall in Philadelphia, where the U.S. Constitution was signed more than 200 years ago. Well, we asked New Yorkers what that document means to them today, and here's what they had to say.
I love the Constitution. It guides our principles and our values.
I believe that it's important that we adhere to the Constitution and, don't get so tangled up in changing everything.
I think that fundamentally the spirit of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is just about the worth of every individual.
I think the U.S. Constitution is an amalgamation of what's best in humans, like our ability to come up with ideas that are meant to protect and serve all of us, but I think it also shows what's worst in humanity. I think a lot of the Constitution needs to be augmented. It wasn't expected to hold up to the era that we live in now.
The 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution was adopted to address citizenship rights. It was first introduced following the American Civil War for those who had been enslaved. Today, it's relevant because of the country's large immigration population. So it remains one of the more consequential amendments to date. And Donald Trump says he wants to get rid of it. But how?
We're the only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all of those benefits. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it has to end.
The provision in the Constitution is relatively clear on this issue, and the idea that a president can do this through executive order is really fairly astounding.
Then there's the question of, can he do it by executive order? Right. And Congress has not passed a statute authorizing this. In fact, there's a whole host of statutes that assume that the kids of illegal aliens are citizens, including giving them social security numbers. So it's almost certain that he'd be acting in the face of congressional disapproval, which means he can't do it.
So let's talk about what rights are inalienable and firmly protected by the country's founding document. For this edition of The Beat on the Street, we caught up with constitutional historian Lorianne Updike-Toller. So, Lorianne, President Donald Trump wants to sign an executive order that will effectively end the quote-unquote birthright citizenship for children born to non-U.S. citizens. As far as I know, many Americans are taught at a very early age that the concept of birthright citizenship is an undisputed right explicitly granted by the U.S. Constitution. But is it really?
Yes, absolutely. So, as part of the 14th Amendment, passed as part of the Reconstruction Amendments after our Civil War, the 14th Amendment guarantees that citizenship, in fact, is allotted by birth. And I do not know of an instance of a president being able to change the Constitution. You certainly have instances wherein presidents acted arguably unconstitutionally, including Jefferson in purchasing Louisiana in 1802. He thought it might not be constitutional, but after the fact he quickly got it ratified by Congress, and most thought that this was in the broad executive powers of the president in foreign relations.
So, pardon the pun, but President Trump can't trump this with an executive order.
I believe that such would be held unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court.
Okay. Let's go back even further. President Trump, many months ago, was talking about a Muslim ban, and you had mentioned the First Amendment. The government strictly prohibits any particular law against a specific religion or based on religion. Is this Muslim ban, quote unquote, against the country's founding document?
Well, you're asking a few questions here, so let's tease this out a little bit. So we have a Constitution, and you're right, the First Amendment says Congress will make no law respecting an establishment of religion. The Constitution, however, applies to U.S. citizens in the first instance, and it applies to under the 14th Amendment, it applies to all people on United States soil in terms of equal protection, as we discussed. So the U.S. Constitution does not apply to people outside of the United States who are wanting to come in.
Okay, so that's a point.
That's number one. However, the family of the world is connected. And usually when somebody's wanting to come to the United States, there are people here that are related to them and that love them. They have First Amendment rights.
President Trump has threatened various cities to withhold federal funding if they don't abide by various immigration statutes, legal or not.
Okay, this is another really complicated question. So there's a few things at play here. The U.S. Supreme Court and Prince v. versus United States said that the federal government cannot, or actually Congress cannot, commandeer state officials. They can't tell them what to do. However, when you have federal funding at play, you can limit that because the states do not have a right to federal funding. There is no implicit right. However, this is the president and not Congress saying what the state officials can and can't do. So can the president do what Congress can? That's the real question here. He might be able to. The Supreme Court might say yes.
Lorianne, thank you very much for speaking to
Absolutely.
us. Thank you. Some legal observers believe that the presidential oath reflects a uniquely personal duty to protect the Constitution from threats, both internal and external. Others see things a little bit more fluidly. So where does the U.S. president lie in all of these issues? Are his actions leading the country towards a constitutional crisis? Well, it's time to lay it on the table. Joining me now here in the studio are John Burnett, who is a strategic advisor for the New York Republican State Committee, and Professor William Ariza from the Brooklyn Law School. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you. Bill, let me start with you. The southern states wanting to get away from the Union back in 1861.
Yes.
That's a constitutional crisis. Bush versus Gore in 2000 in the Florida recount. That's a constitutional crisis. Is what we're going through today considered a constitutional crisis?
I wouldn't call it a constitutional crisis yet. What the president has been doing is something that is governed by a structure of laws and norms. And so far, those laws and norms have been more or less holding firm. It's always possible that the president could take one step too far and, in fact, provoke a constitutional crisis. Firing Robert Mueller, for example, might provoke such a crisis. I don't think we're there yet.
Okay. John, let me turn to you. When the president first proposed the idea of the Muslim ban, that was overturned by a federal court. Just recently, we've seen President Trump also issue an executive order banning the possibility of asylum for those who cross illegally. That's also been overturned. Sooner or later, these issues are going to go up to the Supreme Court. Right. But with Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court now, is this a strategy that President Trump might be playing?
Well, initially, the travel ban was struck down. But then I believe, based upon history, it was eventually upheld because the president has the obligation and the right at his discretion based upon information that we all know and some, foreign intelligence that he's privy to make those decisions. And I think that it's also playing out in some of these other decisions. Look, the thing is, we are a welcoming nation. But what we've seen of late, even Mexico is looking at this situation, some of the citizens as well as the government. Like, you know what? They've been bombarded with thousands and thousands of people demanding to be taken care of until the U.S. government can actually process them at the border. And then they have this sense of entitlement that, you know what? We want in. And when you look at it, it's not just asylum seekers. These are strong and able-bodied men, not just families, in the number of approximately 80%.
But they are protected under the Fifth Amendment, though.
And under statutory law.
Yeah, but the thing is that you don't get the right to cross the border anywhere along the border. You have to go to specific points of entry. But also the thing is that while everyday citizens, the forgotten men and women of this country are fed up with the federal government giving a lot of perks and a lot of things to people from the outside when we're not doing what we need to do internally. So those things have to be addressed.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that we should go against the 14th Amendment, but what we need to do is cut out some of these loopholes.
Okay. So what's the right way to tackle this then?
Yes. Well, absolutely the president has lots of discretion. Absolutely, there is a mandate on his part to take care that the laws are executed and that the country is safe. But he has to do that within the framework of law. And indeed, the initial question about whether we have a constitutional crisis, in a lot of ways, turns on whether the president is taking care of these responsibilities in a way that is allowed by law or acting extra-legally.
But let me push back on that for a second. The moment that many of these individuals from Central America actually cross the Mexican border, the asylum claim is moot. Completely. And that's a point that's overlooked.
They have a right to seek asylum from the country they choose.
They are coming to America under the guise of asylum when they really want job, economic opportunity. So let's call it what it is and not mask it for the purpose of undermining our laws.
The problem is we don't know what it is, and it's the whole purpose of the asylum process to suss out what the actual motivations are.
Okay. For decades now, this immigration issue has been coined by both sides as broken. How do you move forward? How do you fix it then?
It has to be bipartisan. Absolutely. If you do this in a ram it down the throat of the other party way, it is not a compromise that's going to stick. It's not a law that's going to stick. This has to be something that everyone has their signature on, that everyone has their fingerprints on.
We've been saying that for decades now.
Would it let at least 60 votes in the Senate and not 50 or 51, right?
Well, if Speaker McConnell wants to make it 50, he can do that.
Yeah, but you know what? I think in the spirit of agreeing, we're actually going to agree on the final talking point. But I think that we shouldn't actually ram it, to your point, down the American people's throat. Yes, they did vote for President Trump, but also we have to respect both sides to make sure that we can maintain unity in our land.
Especially because of what happened 2 Tuesdays ago.
Okay.
Yes.
William and John, thank you very much for joining us here on The Square. Appreciate all the insight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's talk more about the Fifth Amendment now and the issue of immigration. The amendment says that no one should be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Thousands of migrants from across Central America have been traveling towards the U.S.-Mexico border for weeks now. And President Donald Trump says it's an invasion, and he wants to stop them from claiming asylum. But is that constitutional? Our Nicole Johnson reports from Mexico.
Salomon Santos and his family left Honduras with one goal in mind: to cross the border to the United States. He blames gang violence for driving him from home.
If it wasn't a question of our lives, we wouldn't have put ourselves in this situation. But over there, life is hard and dangerous. I just want to protect my family, and we're seeking a dignified life.
But that's unlikely to happen while Donald Trump is US president. He says the caravan must be stopped.
After caravan, isn't that nice, of illegal aliens to flood into our country and overwhelm your communities. That's what's happened. Have you seen the pictures?
Trump is using executive power to overturn or bypass America's immigration laws. He wants to deny the right to apply for asylum to anyone who enters the US illegally, arguing refugees are a threat to national security. However, the United Nations says people are forced to cross illegally because the alternative, going through an official border crossing, takes months. The president's attempt to change asylum law has been temporarily blocked. A federal judge found that it was unconstitutional because it violated Congress. So for now, it's on hold. But thousands of people are travelling to the US border anyway.
Long-standing insufficient reception capacity at the official U.S. southern border port of entry implies significant delays in the northern part of Mexico. And this is forcing many vulnerable asylum seekers to turn in desperation in the hand of smugglers and cross the border irregularly.
That's what Fernando Lanza wants to do.
I would rather smuggle myself across the border and stay without documents, because the asylum process has become much harder. They detain you for months, make you wear an ankle monitor, or make you sign a paper giving up your rights. I can't risk being deported.
There's another constitutional question here. Is President Trump trying to overturn the Fifth Amendment? A 1993 ruling found that amendment entitles everyone to a proper legal process in the case of possible deportation. The American Civil Liberties Union is now suing the president over this. If it fails, the only route to asylum in the US will be through a designated port of entry. That leaves thousands of people stuck in migrant caravans across Mexico with little hope of ever making it to the United States. And in the end, that is President Trump's goal. Nicole Johnston, The Square, Tijuana.
Let's talk more about the issues now with Professor Gary Nordlinger from George Washington University, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Gary, thank you very much for joining us. I think the question is simple here. Is President Trump trying to act above the Constitution?
No, I don't think he is, but I think he's trying to press his powers to the limit of the Constitution. And Donald Trump loves a good fight. It gives him plenty of media attention. You know, he likes being seen as a combative, fighting figure.
These thousands of immigrants who have been traveling with the caravan from Central America up towards the U.S. border, they're not U.S. citizens, but are they protected under the U.S. Constitution? Do they have rights under the Constitution?
Not until they enter the United States. Now, on the other hand, if they have relatives that are legally living within the United States, then those relatives have the right to, try to get them visas to enter the United States. But that's an entirely different issue.
How does this process all play out? Is this likely to go up to the Supreme Court?
Oh, I guarantee you it will go to the Supreme Court. What we have is that there are about 780 district court judges in the United States at the federal level. One of those 780 said, hey, this isn't right, it's illegal, I'm putting an injunction on this. But what really matters is what does the majority of the 9-member Supreme Court have to say? And I think you will see this fast track to the Supreme Court.
What do you think they're likely to say? And is this a tactic that President Trump is playing that he can play in his advantage?
Listen, Donald Trump has taken the issue of illegal immigration from the day he announced for office in 2015. And he has taken that issue, secured the Republican nomination for president, and then won the presidency. So this is his signature issue. And, he's going to bend over backwards to try to keep these people out of the United States.
This is not the first stab he's having at his signature issue in terms of immigration. We've seen it before when he brought up the issue of the quote-unquote Muslim ban or the travel ban. How do you think this compares to what's going on right now?
Well, I think there are a lot of parallels. That ultimately went to the Supreme Court. It was a case called Trump versus Hawaii. The Supreme Court said, hey, wait a minute. When it comes to regulating who enters the United States, the president has very, very wide authority here and a lot of discretion.
Okay. Gary Nordlinger joining us from Washington. Thank you very much for joining us here on The Square. So what do you get when you put lawyers around a table? Well, beyond a reasonable doubt, they'll tell you what's legal, what's not, what you can get away with, and what you can't. And if you're wondering about Donald Trump's case, they'll tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I'm Courtney Keeley with TRT World, and we're at Hobby's Delicatessen, a true deli landmark in Newark, New Jersey. I'm with 3 practicing lawyers, 1 law student and journalist, and we're going to be talking about the Constitution. Our case is being made to tell the president, you have to cede your powers here, you're overstepping the Constitution. What comes to mind when I ask you that question?
The Democrats have recently taken control of the House, and they may start exercising their subpoena power.
What's happening is that people are getting lost in his tweets.
It's the idea of what is the limit of presidential power and what is the limit of executive power. I think what you're seeing now is people see Trump, part of it being noise, tweets at 3 o'clock in the morning. Part of it is many people thinking running rampant in terms of the courts.
He may be getting legal counsel. There's a lot of smart lawyers around him, but he may not be listening to the legal counsel.
Where in the law does all of what he's saying he's going to do and what he can do lie?
The Republicans still control the Senate. So, in terms of who's going to be the judicial force to try to check the president, that's going to go one way. In terms of the legislative force to check the president, that's going to go another way.
Let's move on to CNN First Amendment.
Jim Acosta is claiming, and CNN, first that by revoking his press credentials to the White House, his hard pass to get into the White House, that the president is infringing upon his First Amendment rights. The second aspect of that is that by taking away that hard pass, Jim Acosta was deprived of his constitutional due process, and so that would be the Fifth Amendment.
So this is a purely constitutional argument in which you have conservatives arguing with liberals and saying it's unconstitutional. You have a couple of constitutional scholars that say it's not unconstitutional. At least it's a cogent argument back and forth, but I think the majority by far says that it was an unconstitutional move.
When you go back to something like Fox News joining in with CNN on a challenge to press access to the White House press conferences, I think Voltaire's maxim that I detest what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it is what should be applying.
Regardless of whether you're liberal or conservative, you want your views to be heard and you want them to be protected.
So clearly you guys are all proponents of the First Amendment, but overall fans of the Constitution?
It's the Constitution. America is not held together by blood, language, or religion. It is held together by the Constitution. It is the best thing the Founding Fathers did, and it's the thing that's going to keep us together going forward.
Donald Trump is a divisive character, and as we enter the second half of his presidency, it seems as though he's determined to push some hardline policies through. We know he doesn't shy away from the opposition. The question, though, is whether he's willing to take on the law of the land in order to make his mark. Well, that's it from our team here in New York. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time here on The Square.